The thunder cracked like a whip across the darkening New Mexico sky, as Tessa Wilson clutched her rain-soaked belongings, staring at the swollen river that now blocked her path to Los Alamos. She had never seen the normally placid Rio Grande rise with such ferocity, its muddy waters churning with debris torn from upstream farms and settlements. What had started as a light spring shower had transformed into a deluge that threatened to wash away everything in its path, including her dreams of a new beginning. New Mexico Territory, 1885, Tessa had left everything behind in St. Louis, a broken engagement, the whispers that followed her through town, and the stifling expectations of a woman whose fiancé had abandoned her for another. The teaching position in Los Alamos had been her salvation, a chance to remake herself in a place where no one knew her name or her shame. But now, as she stood at the river's edge watching her carefully laid plans being swept downstream, Tessa wondered if fate was conspiring against her once again. The wagon that had carried her this far lay broken behind her, its wheels shattered when they'd hit a rock trying to outrun the storm. The driver had abandoned her, taking his team and heading back to the last settlement they'd passed, promising to return with help but looking too frightened to be trustworthy. "Just stay put, miss," he'd called over his shoulder as he rode away. "Don't you go near that water." But that had been hours ago, and the rain showed no signs of stopping. The water had crept closer, inch by inch, until Tessa realized she needed to move to higher ground or risk being swept away in the night. Her trunk of books and clothing, the meager possessions she'd brought to start her new life, would have to be abandoned. Gathering her skirts, she began to climb the rocky slope that paralleled the river, searching for a safe place to wait out the storm. The terrain was unfamiliar and treacherous, slick with mud and flowing water. A rock turned beneath her boot, and Tessa felt herself sliding downward toward the raging current. She screamed as her body hit the frigid water, the force of it stealing her breath. The current caught her immediately, pulling her under and then tossing her to the surface like a rag doll. Tessa fought desperately, her sodden clothes weighing her down as she tried to keep her head above water. "Help!" she cried out, knowing it was futile. There was no one to hear her over the roar of the water and the pounding rain. The river carried her downstream, past boulders that threatened to dash her against their unforgiving surfaces. Just as her strength began to fail, Tessa caught sight of a fallen tree extending into the water. With the last of her energy, she lunged for it, her fingers scraping against the rough bark before finding purchase. She clung there, shivering and coughing up river water, unable to pull herself fully from the current's grasp. That's when she saw him, a silhouette on horseback against the stormy sky. He dismounted with fluid grace, securing his horse before making his way carefully down to the riverbank. "Hold on," he shouted above the river's roar. "You're not alone." The man stretched out across the fallen tree trunk, extending a strong hand toward her. "Grab hold, miss. I've got you." Tessa reached out, their fingers brushing twice before finally connecting. His grip was like iron as he began to pull her from the water's clutches. For a moment it seemed the river might win, might tear her from his grasp, but then with one mighty effort he hauled her onto the log beside him. "I've got you," he repeated, his voice softer but no less determined as he helped her to shore. "You're safe now." In the fading light, Tessa looked up at her rescuer. His face was partially shadowed by the brim of his hat, but she could make out the strong line of his jaw, dark with stubble, and eyes that seemed to reflect the storm's intensity. Water dripped from his duster and the bandana tied around his neck, evidence of his willingness to risk himself for a stranger. "Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. I thought I was going to die." "Not today," he answered, shrugging off his duster and wrapping it around her shoulders. Though it was a near thing. "What are you doing out here alone during a flood, my wagon?" Tessa began, but a fit of coughing interrupted her explanation. The man nodded, seeming to understand without further details. "We need to get you warm and dry. My cabin's not far. Can you ride?" Tessa nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure. She'd never felt so weak, so utterly spent. But the alternative was remaining in the rain, and that was no choice at all. "Name's Tyler Vaughn," he said as he helped her to her feet. "Most folks around here just call me Vaughn." "Tessa Wilson," she replied, her voice barely audible above the storm. Tyler led her to his horse, a magnificent buckskin that stood patiently despite the weather. "Up you go," he said, interlacing his fingers to create a step for her. Once she was seated in the saddle, he swung up behind her with practiced ease, one arm securing her against his chest. "Hold tight to the saddle horn," he instructed. And then they were moving, the horse picking its way carefully along a path only Tyler seemed able to see in the gathering darkness. Tessa fought to stay conscious, the warmth of the man behind her and the rhythmic motion of the horse lulling her toward oblivion. She didn't know this man, didn't know if she could trust him, but her options had narrowed to this single chance, and she had no choice but to take it. The cabin appeared as if conjured from the storm itself, a solid structure of logs and stone that promised shelter from the elements. A small corral and stable stood nearby, and Tyler guided the horse directly to the shelter before dismounting and helping Tessa down. Her legs buckled beneath her as her feet touched the ground, but Tyler caught her, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. "Easy there," he murmured. "Let's get you inside." The cabin was simple but well-maintained, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. Tyler settled Tessa in a chair near the cold hearth before moving with purpose to start a fire. His movements were efficient, practiced, speaking of years of self-reliance. "How did you find me?" Tessa asked as the first flames began to lick at the kindling. Tyler glanced up, the firelight illuminating his features more clearly now. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and wind. His dark hair curled slightly where it escaped his hat. "I was checking the fences when I saw the storm coming, was heading back when I heard you call out." He stood, moving to a trunk in the corner. "You need dry clothes. I don't have much that'll fit you, but it'll be better than what you're wearing now." He handed her a shirt and a pair of trousers that would clearly swallow her whole. "You can change behind that screen," he said, indicating a wooden divider in the corner. "I'll make some coffee." Tessa hesitated, propriety warring with necessity. Instinct. Louis, being alone with a man in his home would have been scandalous. Wearing his clothing unthinkable. But here, with the storm raging outside and her own clothes soaked through, such concerns seemed trivial. Behind the screen, she peeled off her sodden dress and petticoats, wringing out what water she could before hanging them over the screen to dry. Tyler's shirt hung to her knees, the trousers cinched with a piece of rope to keep them from falling down completely. When she emerged, he had his back to her, focused on the pot of coffee heating over the fire. "Thank you," she said, drawing his attention, "for everything." Tyler turned, his expression softening slightly as he took in her appearance. "You're welcome, though I reckon thanks aren't necessary." "Anyone would have done the same." "I don't believe that's true," Tessa replied, settling back into the chair by the fire. "The wagon driver who left me certainly didn't." A flash of anger crossed Tyler's face. "What kind of man leaves a woman alone in a storm?" "The kind who values his own skin above all else, I suppose." Tessa wrapped her arms around herself, still chilled despite the dry clothes and growing fire. "I shouldn't blame him entirely. I insisted we continue despite the weather. I was determined to reach Los Alamos. Tyler handed her a steaming cup of coffee. Los Alamos? What business do you have there? I'm to be the new schoolteacher. Tessa accepted the cup gratefully, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. At least I was. Now I'm not sure I'll ever arrive or if they'll still want me if I do. I've lost everything in the river, my clothes, my books, all the teaching materials I brought with me. Tyler considered this as he poured his own coffee. The river will go down eventually. Might take a few days, but I can get you to Los Alamos when it does. Tessa looked up in surprise. You would do that? But surely you have your own work, your own concerns. Tyler shrugged, settling into a chair opposite her. Ranch'll keep. Besides, Los Alamos needs a teacher. Haven't had one in nearly a year. Children are growing wild as weeds. You have children in Los Alamos? Tessa asked, curious about the community she had yet to see. Not my own, Tyler clarified quickly. But plenty of families there with young ones. Town's been growing since the railroad came through. They fell into silence, listening to the rain drumming on the roof and the occasional crack of thunder. Tessa found herself studying her rescuer when he wasn't looking. There was a quietness to him, a self-contained quality that suggested he was comfortable with solitude. Yet there was kindness too, evident in the way he'd risked himself to save her and opened his home without hesitation. You should try to sleep, Tyler said eventually, rising to his feet. Take the bed, I'll be fine out here. Tessa wanted to protest, to insist she couldn't take his bed, but exhaustion washed over her in a wave that made argument impossible. She nodded, setting aside her empty cup. Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Just Vaughn, he corrected gently. Or Tyler, if you prefer. No need for formalities out here. Tessa nodded again, making her way to the small but neat bed in the corner of the cabin. It seemed so intimate, sleeping in this stranger's bed, wrapped in his clothes, surrounded by his few possessions. Yet there was no impropriety in his manner, nothing to suggest he expected anything from her beyond the courtesy of one traveler to another. As she lay down, pulling the rough wool blanket up to her chin, Tessa realized this was the first time since leaving St. Louis that she hadn't felt utterly alone. It was an odd thought to have about a man she'd just met, a man who was still very much a stranger. But there had been something in those words, hold on. You're not alone, that had reached beyond her physical peril to touch the deeper loneliness she'd carried with her. With the sound of Tyler moving quietly around the cabin, banking the fire for the night, Tessa drifted into sleep, too exhausted even to dream. Morning brought watery sunshine and the discovery that the rain had finally stopped. Tessa woke to find the cabin empty, though a pot of coffee sat keeping warm by the fire and a note had been left on the table. Gone to check the river. Back soon. Help yourself to breakfast. She rose, feeling stiff and sore from her ordeal but refreshed from sleep. Her clothes still hung over the screen, now mostly dry if somewhat worse for wear. She changed quickly, grateful to be back in her own garments despite their bedraggled state. The cabin looked different in daylight, more welcoming somehow, with sunlight streaming through the small windows. It was sparsely furnished but neat, with a bookshelf holding a surprising number of volumes. Curious, Tessa examined the titles, histories, some poetry, practical guides to ranching and veterinary care. Not the collection of a man unconcerned with matters of the mind. A sound at the door announced Tyler's return. He entered, bringing with him the scent of fresh air and damp earth. His expression was grim. "River's still too high to cross," he reported, "and it's taken out the bridge at Miller's Crossing. Might be a week before anyone can get to Los Alamos that way." Tessa's heart sank. A week? But school is meant to start in 3 days. The town council will think I've abandoned my post. Tyler hung his hat on a peg by the door. There's another way around, but it'll take us through Apache territory. Not something I'd normally suggest, but if you're set on getting there in time. Is it dangerous? Tessa asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Could be, Tyler admitted. Relations with the Apache have been peaceful lately, but that can change quick. There's always risk crossing their lands without permission. Tessa considered her options, which were few. Stay here and miss her opportunity, or take a chance on reaching Los Alamos in time. I've come too far to give up now, she said finally. If you're willing to guide me, I'd like to try the other route. Tyler studied her for a long moment, as if taking the measure of her resolve. We need to leave today, travel light and fast. Can you ride? Yes, Tessa answered, though it had been years since she'd been on horseback. I grew up riding, though I'm out of practice. It'll have to do. Tyler moved to a chest near the bed, pulling out a pair of saddlebags. Pack what you need for a few days. I'll get supplies ready. The next hours passed in a flurry of preparation. Tyler loaned Tessa a spare riding skirt that had belonged to his sister. She lives in Denver now, married a shopkeeper, which was somewhat short but serviceable. He packed provisions, ammunition for the rifle he would carry, and basic medical supplies. By mid-morning they were ready to depart. Tyler owned 3 horses, his buckskin gelding, a sturdy roan mare that Tessa would ride, and a pack horse to carry their supplies. As they set out, Tyler explained their route. We'll head northwest, following the old trading path through the mountains. If the weather holds and we make good time, we can reach Los Alamos in 3 days. Tessa nodded, adjusting to the rhythm of the horse beneath her. The roan had a smooth gait, thankfully, and seemed to sense Tessa's nervousness, behaving with admirable patience. What made you decide to become a teacher? Tyler asked as they rode side by side along a narrow trail. The question surprised Tessa. Most men she'd known showed little interest in women's work or ambitions. I've always loved learning, she answered honestly. And I believe education is the key to a better future, especially for girls who might otherwise have limited opportunities. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. My sister was like that, always with her nose in a book. Our pa thought it was a waste of time, but our ma encouraged it, said there was more to life than just surviving. Your mother sounds like a wise woman, Tessa said. Are your parents still living? A shadow crossed Tyler's face. No. Lost them both to influenza 5 years back. That's when I took over the ranch. My sister moved to Denver the year after. I'm sorry for your loss, Tessa said softly. I lost my own parents when I was 16. My aunt raised me after that. They shared a moment of understanding, the kind that comes from similar grief. Then Tyler changed the subject, pointing out landmarks and explaining the terrain they were traversing. He was knowledgeable about the land, the plants and animals they encountered, speaking of them with respect rather than the conquering attitude Tessa had often heard from men in the East. As the day progressed, Tessa found herself watching Tyler when he rode ahead of her on the trail. There was an easy competence to everything he did, from the way he handled his horse to how he read the landscape around them. It was different from the polished manners of the city men she'd known, including her former fiancé, whose charm had hidden a fundamental unreliability she'd discovered too late. They made camp as the sun began to set, finding a sheltered spot near a small spring. Tyler efficiently set up their simple camp, starting a fire and preparing a meal of beans, bacon, and coffee. They ate in companionable silence, the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky above them. You said you were checking fences when you found me, Tessa said as they finished their meal. Do you have a large ranch? Tyler shook his head. Not compared to some. 500 acres, about 100 head of cattle, enough to keep me busy and make a living, not enough to need much help. I hire a few hands during calving season, but mostly it's just me. That sounds lonely, Tessa observed, then immediately regretted her forwardness. I'm sorry, that was presumptuous of me. But Tyler didn't seem offended. It can be, he acknowledged, but there's peace in it too. After a day of people and problems in town, it's good to have a place that's just mine. He paused, stirring the fire with a stick. What about you? What brings a woman all the way from St. Louis to teach in a place she's never seen? Tessa hesitated, unsure how much to share. But something about the night, the stars overhead and the wilderness around them, made secrets seem pointless. I was engaged to be married, she said finally. He was a banker's son, considered quite a catch. 2 weeks before the wedding, I found him with another woman, the daughter of a wealthy railroad investor. When confronted, he didn't even deny it. He said he'd found a better opportunity. Tyler's expression darkened. Sounds like a man with no honor. Indeed, what followed was difficult. The wedding was called off, of course, but the scandal was significant. My former fiancé married the investor's daughter a month later, while I became an object of pity and gossip. Tessa stared into the fire, remembering the whispers, the sidelong glances. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in New Mexico territory, it seemed like providence. A chance to go somewhere no one knew my name or my shame. There's no shame in being betrayed, Tyler said firmly. The shame belongs to the one who broke their word. His straightforward defense warmed something in Tessa's chest. Thank you for saying that. Not everyone saw it that way in St. Louis. They fell silent again, each lost in their own thoughts as the fire crackled between them. Finally, Tyler rose, beginning to arrange their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. We should get some rest. Long day of riding ahead tomorrow. Tessa nodded, suddenly aware of the impropriety of their situation alone together in the wilderness, days from civilization. Yet she felt no fear, no concern for her safety with Tyler. There was something fundamentally trustworthy about him, a steadiness that came from knowing exactly who he was and standing firmly in that knowledge. As she settled into her bedroll, Tessa found herself wondering what might have happened if she'd never agreed to marry William back in St. Louis. If she'd waited, would she have found someone with Tyler's quiet integrity instead? The thought surprised her, and she pushed it away. She had come west to be a teacher, not to find another man. Her independence was hard-won and precious. Still, as sleep claimed her, Tessa couldn't help but think that being rescued by Tyler Vaughn might have been the first stroke of true luck she'd had in a very long time. The next day dawned clear and cool, perfect for traveling. They broke camp efficiently, Tyler showing Tessa how to properly extinguish their fire and leave minimal evidence of their passing. Apache can read sign better than most men read books, he explained. No sense advertising our presence more than necessary. They rode higher into the mountains, the terrain becoming more challenging. Tessa's muscles protested after years without riding, but she didn't complain. There was a freedom in this journey, in the vast sky above and the endless landscape around them, that made her previous life seem confined and colorless in comparison. Around midday, they stopped in a small meadow to rest the horses and eat a simple lunch of jerky and hardtack. Tyler had just finished checking the roan's shoes when he suddenly stiffened, his gaze fixed on the ridge above them. "Don't move," he said quietly, his hand moving casually to the rifle slung across his back. Tessa froze, following his gaze to see 3 mounted figures silhouetted against the sky. Even at this distance, their identity was unmistakable Apache warriors, watching them intently. "What do we do?" she whispered, fear making her voice tremble slightly. Tyler straightened slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and unthreatening. "We show respect," he answered, raising his hand in a gesture of peace, "and hope they're feeling generous today." The warriors remained motionless for several long moments, then one raised his hand in return. A signal passed between them and they turned their horses, disappearing over the ridge as suddenly as they had appeared. Tessa released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Are they gone?" "For now," Tyler said, though his posture remained vigilant. "But they know we're here. We should move on, try to reach Blackwater Canyon by nightfall. There's a defensible spot there to make camp." They mounted quickly, pushing the horses at a faster pace than before. Tessa could sense Tyler's increased wariness, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert to any sign of danger. "Have you had trouble with the Apache before?" she asked as they rode. Tyler considered the question carefully before answering. "Not trouble exactly. There's been an uneasy peace these past few years. I've traded with them occasionally. They value good horses, and I've had a few they wanted. But the situation's complicated. The government keeps breaking treaties, pushing them onto smaller and poorer reservations. Some bands have refused to go, and I can't say I blame them." "You sound sympathetic to their cause," Tessa observed. "I believe a man should keep his word," Tyler replied simply. "Government made promises, then broke them when it was convenient. Hard to build trust that way." They rode in silence for a while, Tessa thinking about Tyler's words. It was a perspective she hadn't often heard in St. Louis, where most viewed the Indian tribes as obstacles to progress, rather than people with legitimate grievances. The sun was low in the sky when they reached Blackwater Canyon, a narrow passage between towering rock walls. Tyler led them to a small clearing backed by a sheer cliff with a stream flowing nearby. "We'll camp here," he decided, dismounting. "Good water, and the cliff at our backs means no surprises from that direction." They established camp more quickly this time, Tessa taking on tasks without being asked, learning from observation. As darkness fell, Tyler built only a small fire, enough for cooking but not large enough to be visible from a distance. "You think they'll come back?" Tessa asked as they sat close to the fire. The night air having grown considerably cooler, Tyler added a small stick to the flames. "Hard to say. They might be curious about what we're doing in their territory, or they might have more pressing concerns." He glanced at Tessa, noting her worried expression. "Try not to fret. I've traveled this way before without trouble." "You seem to know a great deal about surviving out here," Tessa observed. "Were you always a rancher?" A slight smile touched Tyler's lips. "No. Spent some years as a scout for the Army when I first came west, then did some freighting, some trapping, worked cattle for other men until I could afford my own place." He poked at the fire thoughtfully. "Tried a lot of things before I found what suited me." "And what suits you about ranching?" Tessa asked, genuinely curious. Tyler considered the question longer than she expected. "The rhythm of it," he finally said. "The seasons, the cycles of life, building something that might last." He paused, then added more quietly, "And at the end of the day, there's a place that's mine, where I belong." The simple sincerity of his answer touched Tessa deeply. It revealed a longing for home, for roots that resonated with her own unsettled heart. "I hope to find that too," she admitted. "A place where I belong." Tyler's eyes met hers across the fire, their expression softening. "Los Alamos could be that place. It's a good town, growing but not too fast. People look out for each other there." "You make it sound appealing," Tessa said with a small smile. "It has its charms," Tyler agreed. Then, almost hesitantly, "When we get there, I could show you around, help you get settled." The offer surprised Tessa, though not unpleasantly. "I'd like that," she said softly. They fell silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before, charged with something unspoken, a tentative connection forming between them. Tessa found herself wondering what life might be like in Los Alamos with someone like Tyler nearby, someone steady and reliable who seemed to see her for who she truly was rather than what society expected her to be. The thought both thrilled and frightened her. She had come west to be independent, not to leap from one attachment to another. Yet there was nothing possessive in Tyler's manner, nothing to suggest he saw her as anything but an equal deserving of respect. Sleep came more slowly that night, her mind full of contradictory thoughts and unfamiliar feelings. When she finally drifted off, it was to dreams of wide open spaces and a hand reaching out to steady her when she faltered. Dawn broke with a light mist hanging in the canyon, giving the landscape an ethereal quality. Tessa woke to find Tyler already up, returning from checking the horses. "Storm coming," he said by way of greeting, nodding toward the western horizon where dark clouds were gathering. "We should try to make it through the canyon before it hits." They packed swiftly, eating a cold breakfast to avoid delaying their departure. As they rode deeper into the canyon, the walls rose higher around them, creating a natural corridor that funneled the growing wind. "How much farther to Los Alamos?" Tessa asked, raising her voice above the wind. "If we keep this pace, we could be there by tomorrow evening," Tyler replied. "But this weather might slow us down." The first fat raindrops began to fall as they reached a narrow section of the canyon. Tyler held up a hand, signaling Tessa to stop. "Listen," he said, his head tilted slightly. At first, Tessa heard nothing but the wind and rain. Then she caught it, a low rumble, almost felt rather than heard, coming from somewhere up the canyon. Tyler's expression turned grim. "Flash flood. The rain must be heavier upstream." He scanned the canyon walls quickly, pointing to a narrow trail that led upward. "That way now, ride hard." Without questioning, Tessa urged her horse forward, following Tyler toward the trail. The rumble had become a roar now, unmistakable and terrifying. She risked a glance back and saw it, a wall of churning water and debris surging down the canyon toward them. The horses sensed the danger, needing little encouragement to scramble up the steep trail. Tessa's heart hammered in her chest as her mount's hooves slipped on the wet rock, regaining purchase just in time to lunge forward again. Tyler was just ahead, leading the pack horse, constantly looking back to ensure she was still following. They had nearly reached a wide ledge halfway up the canyon wall when disaster struck. A boulder, loosened by the rain, crashed down onto the trail just behind Tessa's horse. The animal reared in terror, nearly throwing Tessa from the saddle. As she struggled to regain control, the edge of the trail crumbled beneath the horse's hind hooves. Time seemed to slow as Tessa felt herself falling, the roan scrambling desperately but unable to find solid ground. She heard Tyler shout her name, saw him lunging toward her from the ledge above, but it was too late. Horse and rider tumbled from the trail, plunging toward the canyon floor now covered with the raging floodwaters. The impact knocked the breath from Tessa's body. By some miracle, she'd fallen into one of the few deeper pools along the canyon's edge, rather than onto rock or directly into the main current. The roan was not so fortunate. She caught a glimpse of the poor animal being swept away, as she fought to keep her own head above water. The flood was rising rapidly, the relatively calm pool where she'd landed soon to be engulfed by the main torrent. Tessa struggled toward the canyon wall, her sodden clothes weighing her down. She managed to grasp a protruding rock, clinging to it as the water swirled around her chest, then her shoulders. "Tessa!" Tyler's voice carried above the roar of the flood. He had tied his horse securely and was making his way down the canyon wall. using natural handholds in the rock face with the skill of a man who'd spent his life in such terrain. "Here," she called back, her voice thin with fear and exhaustion. Tyler reached a point directly above her, still a good 15 feet up the cliff face. "Can you climb up to me?" he shouted. Tessa looked at the sheer rock between them, then at the rising water now reaching her chin. "I don't think so." Tyler gauged the distance, the flood's rise, making calculations in his head. He secured himself to a sturdy root protruding from the cliff, then began to lower his body downward, stretching toward Tessa with his free hand. "Reach up," he called. "You can do it." The water was at her lips now, forcing Tessa to tilt her head back to breathe. With one desperate surge of strength, she pushed herself up from her precarious handhold, reaching toward Tyler's outstretched hand. Their fingers brushed, slipped apart. Tessa fell back, the water closing over her head momentarily before she resurfaced, gasping. "Try again," Tyler urged, stretching impossibly further. "Hold on, Tessa. You're not alone." Something in those words, in the fierce determination on his face, gave Tessa renewed strength. As the water lifted her slightly, she lunged upward once more, her hand connecting solidly with Tyler's this time. His grip was iron, his strength astonishing as he began to pull her up the cliff face. Tessa found footholds where she could, helping as much as possible, but it was primarily Tyler's power that lifted her from the flood's grasp. When she finally reached the root he was anchored to, Tyler pulled her against him with one arm, holding them both secure against the cliff. "I've got you," he said, his voice rough with exertion and emotion. "I've got you." For a moment they simply clung to each other, Tessa trembling with cold and reaction, Tyler solid and steady against her. Then, with careful movements, he guided her up the remaining distance to the ledge where his horse waited. Safe above the flood, Tessa collapsed onto the stone, coughing up river water, her entire body shaking. Tyler knelt beside her, wrapping his duster around her shoulders for the second time since they'd met. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands gentle as they checked for injuries. "And no," Tessa managed between chattering teeth. "Just sea cold, the horse." "Gone," Tyler confirmed grimly. "Along with the pack horse and our supplies." Tessa closed her eyes briefly, grief for the animals mixing with the realization of their predicament. "I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault," Tyler said firmly. "These things happen in flash floods. We're lucky to be alive." He helped her to her feet, supporting her when her legs threatened to give way. "We need to find shelter, get you warm and dry. There's a cave system further up, used to be an Apache hideout years back. If we can reach it, we'll have a safe place to wait out the storm." With no other options, Tessa nodded her agreement. Tyler helped her onto his buckskin, then mounted behind her, one arm securing her against his chest as they had ridden that first night. This time, however, Tessa found herself leaning into his strength without hesitation, grateful for the steady beat of his heart against her back. They rode slowly along the ledge, following it upward as it curved around the canyon wall. The rain continued to fall, but they were well above the flood now, watching from safety as the torrent below carried trees and debris through the canyon. The cave, when they reached it, proved to be more extensive than Tessa had imagined, a series of interconnected chambers worn into the cliff face by centuries of wind and water. Tyler guided the horse into the outer chamber, which was large enough to provide shelter for all three of them. "There used to be supplies cached here," Tyler explained as he helped Tessa dismount. "Let's hope some might remain." While Tyler searched the deeper chambers, Tessa removed her soaked boots and wrung what water she could from her skirt. She felt chilled to the bone, her earlier near drowning leaving her deeply cold in a way the rain alone wouldn't have caused. Tyler returned carrying a bundle of what looked like ancient blankets. "Found these," he said, shaking out a hide blanket that, while musty-smelling, was dry. "And there's still some firewood stacked in the back cave. Previous visitors left it, looks like." "Is it safe to have a fire?" Tessa asked through chattering teeth. "Won't the smoke be seen?" "In this weather, unlikely," Tyler replied, already arranging wood in a natural alcove where previous fires had clearly burned. "Besides, you need warmth more than we need secrecy right now." He worked efficiently, using flint from a small pouch he carried at his belt to spark the fire to life. Soon, a small but hot blaze cast flickering light through the cave. "You should get out of those wet clothes," Tyler said matter-of-factly. "I'll tend to the horse in the outer chamber. Wrap yourself in these blankets. They're not pretty, but they'll keep you warm." He handed her the bundle of hides and blankets, then tactfully withdrew to give her privacy. Tessa hesitated only briefly before practical necessity overcame modesty. She stripped off her sodden dress and undergarments, using a corner of one blanket to dry herself as best she could before wrapping the largest hide around her body. By the time Tyler returned, she was seated by the fire, her wet clothes spread nearby to dry, the blanket secured firmly around her. He had removed his own drenched coat and outer shirt, wearing only a slightly damp undershirt above his trousers. "Better?" he asked, settling across the fire from her. Tessa nodded, already feeling warmth returning to her limbs. "Much, thank you, for everything. You saved my life twice now." Tyler shook his head slightly. "Just did what needed doing." He stared into the fire for a moment before adding, "I'm sorry about your horse and our supplies." "At least we're alive," Tessa said, "and it seems you have a knack for finding shelter in a crisis." That drew a small smile from him. "Been in my share of tight spots over the years. You learn to prepare to know the land." They fell silent, listening to the rain outside and the crackle of the fire. Despite their precarious situation, Tessa felt a strange sense of peace. Perhaps it was simply relief at being alive, or maybe it was the growing certainty that with Tyler Vaughn she was truly not alone. "What will we do now?" she asked eventually. "How will we reach Los Alamos?" "We'll wait out the storm," Tyler replied. "Once it passes, we can follow the canyon rim until we reach more level ground. From there, it's about a day's ride to town, longer on foot but still manageable." "On foot?" Tessa repeated, dismayed at the prospect. Tyler's expression softened. "We only have one horse now. Buck's strong, but he can't carry us both for long distances, not in this terrain." He hesitated, then added, "I could go ahead, bring back help." "No," Tessa interrupted, surprising herself with her vehemence. "We should stay together." Something flickered in Tyler's eyes, understanding perhaps, or something deeper. He nodded slowly. "Together then." That night they slept on opposite sides of the fire, each wrapped in their makeshift blankets. Despite her exhaustion, Tessa found herself watching Tyler across the flames, wondering at the strange turn of events that had brought them here. 2 near drownings, 2 rescues, and now this forced intimacy that somehow didn't feel forced at all. She had come west seeking independence, a new beginning free from the constraints and judgments of her past. Instead, she'd found herself depending on this quiet, capable man in ways she could never have anticipated. Yet strangely, that dependence didn't feel like weakness or failure. There was a partnership emerging between them, a mutual reliance that enhanced rather than diminished her sense of self. With that puzzling thought, Tessa finally drifted into sleep, lulled by the steady rhythm of the rain and Tyler's deep, even breathing across the fire. Morning brought clearing skies and the challenge of continuing their journey with limited resources. Tessa's clothes had dried overnight, though they were stained and wrinkled from their immersion in the flood. Tyler offered her his spare shirt to wear over her dress, providing an extra layer against the morning chill. They left the cave with a careful plan they would walk, leading the buckskin, alternating who rode when the terrain became too difficult. Tyler had found a small cache of pemmican in the back of the cave, left by previous occupants, which would have to serve as their food until they reached civilization. The canyon rim provided a spectacular view of the destruction below. The flood had reshaped the landscape, leaving behind a debris-filled channel where yesterday a clear trail had run. "Look," Tyler said, pointing to a dark shape wedged among rocks far below. "Your trunk." Tessa peered down, recognizing the battered container that held her few possessions. "At least it survived, even if we can't reach it now." "I'll come back for it," Tyler promised. "Once we've reached Los Alamos and things have settled." The journey was arduous, the terrain challenging even for Tyler who knew it well. They moved slowly, conserving strength and water, speaking little but growing more comfortable in their shared silence. By midday, Tessa's feet were blistered from walking in her still damp boots, but she didn't complain. Tyler noticed anyway, insisting she ride the horse while he continued on foot. "You don't have to protect me," she said as he helped her into the saddle. "I'm stronger than I look." Tyler's hands lingered briefly at her waist before he stepped back. "I don't doubt your strength, Miss Wilson. I've seen plenty evidence of it already." "Tessa," she corrected. "After all we've been through, surely we can dispense with formalities." A smile touched his lips, warming his typically reserved expression. "Tessa, then." They made camp that evening on a plateau overlooking a vast expanse of New Mexico wilderness. The setting sun painted the landscape in gold and crimson, a beauty so stark and powerful it left Tessa momentarily speechless. "It's magnificent," she said finally, standing at the edge of the plateau. "I've never seen anything like it." Tyler moved to stand beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers. "This is what I love about this country. It can try to kill you one moment and show you something so beautiful it stops your heart the next." Tessa glanced at him, struck by the unexpected poetry of his words. In that moment, with the sunset gilding his profile and softening the lines of his face, she saw past the capable exterior to something more, a man of depth and feeling carefully contained beneath his quiet demeanor. "Why did you really help me that day at the river?" she asked suddenly. "The truth, please, not just that anyone would have done the same." Tyler turned to meet her gaze, seeming to consider his answer carefully. "I heard you call out," he said finally. "There was something in your voice, not just fear, but a kind of determination. Like you weren't ready to let the river take you, even though it was winning." He paused, looking back at the sunset. "I admired that. And then when I saw you holding onto that log, fighting with everything you had, I could not help. Couldn't bear the thought of all that courage and spirit being lost." His honesty left Tessa momentarily without words. No man had ever spoken to her that way, seen her that way as someone defined by her courage rather than her appearance or social standing. "Thank you for telling me that," she said softly. Tyler nodded, his eyes still on the horizon where the sun had nearly disappeared. "Truth is usually best, even when it's hard to say." They made a small fire that night, sharing the last of the pemmican Tyler had found in the cave. As they sat side by side looking up at the stars emerging in the clear night sky, Tessa found herself talking about her life in St. Louis, not just the broken engagement, but her dreams of teaching, of making a difference in young lives, especially for girls who might otherwise have limited opportunities. "My aunt thought I was foolish," she admitted. "She said a woman's proper place was in the home, that teaching was just a temporary occupation until marriage, but I've never seen it that way." "What do you see it as?" Tyler asked, genuinely interested. "A calling," Tessa answered without hesitation. A chance to shape the future by helping children learn not just facts and figures, but how to think for themselves, how to question and explore and grow. She smiled slightly. My aunt would say that's dangerous thinking. Your aunt sounds like she's never been west of the Mississippi, Tyler observed with a hint of humor. Out here, women don't have the luxury of being decorative. They work alongside men, building communities, raising families, teaching schools. No one questions their value. Is that why you never married? Tessa asked, then immediately wished she could take back the too personal question. I'm sorry, that's none of my business. But Tyler didn't seem offended. Partly, he acknowledged. Never met a woman who seemed interested in the kind of life I lead, isolated, sometimes hard, far from the comforts of town. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks upward. And I never saw much point in changing who I am to suit someone else's expectations. The simple honesty of his answer resonated deeply with Tessa. Wasn't that exactly what she'd been trying to escape by coming west? The weight of others' expectations, the pressure to conform to a life that didn't fit her dreams. I understand that, she said quietly. More than you might imagine. Their eyes met across the small fire, and something passed between them, a recognition, a connection based on shared values rather than circumstance. In that moment, Tessa felt closer to this man she'd known for barely 3 days than she had to her fiancé of 2 years. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. They set out at dawn the next day, Tyler estimating they would reach Los Alamos by nightfall if they maintained a steady pace. The terrain gradually became less rugged as they descended from the highlands, though evidence of the recent storms was everywhere in swollen streams and muddy trails. By midday, Tessa began to notice signs of civilization, fenced fields in the distance, the occasional wisp of smoke from an isolated homestead. Tyler pointed out landmarks, explaining their significance with the ease of someone deeply connected to the land. That's Widow Jensen's place, he said, indicating a small cabin with a well-tended garden. She makes the best apple pies in the territory when her trees are bearing, and over there, that's where the McCready brothers run sheep, only shepherds for 20 miles, and proud of it. Tessa absorbed these details eagerly, trying to picture herself as part of this community. And your ranch, is it near town? About 5 miles south, Tyler replied. Not the biggest spread, but the land's good, plenty of water, decent grazing. My nearest neighbor is old Henry Wilkins, retired cavalry officer who raises horses now. It sounds lovely, Tessa said sincerely. Tyler glanced at her with a hint of surprise. It's not what you're used to, I imagine. Nothing like St. Louis. That's precisely why it appeals to me, Tessa answered with a smile. I came west for difference, not familiarity. They crested a final ridge in the late afternoon, and there below them lay Los Alamos, a surprisingly substantial settlement nestled in a valley, with a main street lined with businesses, a church steeple rising above the other buildings, and homes scattered outward from the center. There it is, Tyler said, a note of pride in his voice. Home. Tessa felt a flutter of nerves mixed with anticipation. After everything they'd been through to reach this place, would it live up to her hopes? Would she find the belonging she sought? As they approached the town, Tessa walking beside the horse which Tyler now led, they began to draw attention. People stopped what they were doing to watch their progress, some calling out greetings to Tyler, others simply staring curiously at the bedraggled pair. Word of the flood must have reached town, Tyler commented. They're probably surprised to see anyone coming from that direction. They had just reached the edge of the main street when a portly man in a well-worn suit hurried toward them, concern evident on his florid face. Vaughn. Thank the Lord you're safe. We heard about the flash flood in the canyon." He stopped, noticing Tessa for the first time. "And who might this be, Mayor Haskell? This is Miss Tessa Wilson," Tyler introduced formally. "The new school teacher." The mayor's eyebrows shot up. "The school teacher. But we'd given you up for lost, Miss Wilson, when you didn't arrive on the expected day, and then we got news of the flood." He shook his head in wonderment. "This is a miracle." "Not a miracle, Mayor," Tyler corrected quietly. "Just good fortune and determination. Miss Wilson nearly died twice getting here, once in the river before I found her, and again in the canyon during the flood. She's shown more courage in the past 4 days than most men show in a lifetime." The warm pride in Tyler's voice made Tessa's cheeks flush. "Mr. Vaughn exaggerates," she demurred. "He's the one who saved my life twice over." The mayor looked between them with new interest, a knowing smile spreading across his face. "Well, this is a story that needs telling properly. Come, let's get you both somewhere you can clean up and rest. Miss Wilson, we've prepared the teacher's cottage for you, though we feared you might never occupy it. And Vaughn, your sister sent a letter last week. I've been holding it at my office." As they followed Mayor Haskell down the main street, Tessa became acutely aware of her disheveled appearance, her once neat dress stained and wrinkled, her hair falling from its pins, Tyler's oversized shirt draped over her shoulders. Yet the faces that turned toward them showed no judgment, only curiosity and welcome. "The school term was meant to start tomorrow," the mayor explained as they walked, "but given the circumstances, I think we can delay a few days to give you time to settle in, Miss Wilson." "That's very kind," Tessa said gratefully. "My teaching materials were lost in the flood, I'm afraid. I'll need time to prepare new ones." "Don't worry about that," a woman's voice called from the boardwalk. She stepped forward, a handsome, capable-looking woman of about 40. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, run the general store. We've kept all the old school supplies, and I have some catalogs you can order from. We'll get you set up proper." "Thank you," Tessa said, touched by the immediate offer of help. They continued down the street, more townspeople emerging to greet them with similar offers of assistance. By the time they reached the small but neat cottage set aside for the teacher, adjacent to the schoolhouse itself, Tessa was overwhelmed by the community's generosity. "Folks here look after their own," Tyler said quietly as the mayor unlocked the cottage door, "and they've been waiting a long time for a proper teacher. I hope I can live up to their expectations," Tessa whispered back. Tyler's hand briefly touched the small of her back, a gesture of reassurance that sent warmth spreading through her despite her exhaustion. "You will," he said simply. The teacher's cottage proved to be charming, 2 rooms plus a kitchen, simply but comfortably furnished, with curtains at the windows and a small bookshelf already containing several volumes. Someone had placed a vase of wildflowers on the table, and the bed was made up with clean linens. "It's perfect," Tessa breathed, emotion suddenly tightening her throat. After the long journey and all its perils, this little haven seemed like paradise. "Mrs. Mitchell and some of the other ladies will bring over some clothes for you since yours were lost," Mayor Haskell explained. "And there's a bath house behind the cottage. I'll have hot water sent over directly." "Thank you, Mayor," Tessa said sincerely, "for everything." When the mayor had gone, promising to return later to properly introduce her to the town council, Tessa found herself alone with Tyler for the first time since they'd reached Los Alamos. An awkward silence fell between them, both suddenly uncertain of their standing now that the immediate dangers were past. "I should let you rest," Tyler said finally, moving toward the door. "You've been through a lot." "We both have," Tessa replied. She hesitated, then added, "Will I see you again soon?" Something in Tyler's expression softened. I need to check on my ranch, make sure everything's all right after the storm, but I'll be back in town in a day or two." He paused at the door. "And I meant what I said about helping you get settled, showing you around." Tessa smiled, relieved. "I'd like that." After he'd gone, Tessa stood in the middle of her new home, trying to process everything that had happened since she'd first seen the Rio Grande rising in flood. In less than a week, her life had been upended, her carefully laid plans scattered like leaves in the wind. Yet somehow, standing here in this simple cottage in a town where she knew no one except a quiet rancher with steady hands and thoughtful eyes, she felt more at home than she had in years. The next days passed in a whirlwind of activity, as Tessa settled into her role as Los Alamos' schoolteacher. The town proved to be everything Tyler had described: growing but still close-knit, with a diverse population drawn by the railroad, the nearby mining operations, and the fertile valley lands. The school itself was a simple but solid building with rows of desks, a decent blackboard, and windows that let in plenty of light. Her students, ranging from 6 to 16 years old, regarded their new teacher with a mixture of curiosity and wariness that soon gave way to enthusiasm as Tessa demonstrated her commitment to their education. She was surprised and pleased to find several of the older girls especially eager to learn, their ambitions extending beyond the traditional roles their mothers had filled. "My daughter talks of nothing but becoming a doctor now," Mrs. Hernandez told Tessa after the first week of classes. "She says you told the children that women can study medicine." "They can," Tessa confirmed. "There are women doctors practicing in several eastern cities, and the number grows each year." Mrs. Hernandez had looked thoughtful rather than disapproving. "My grandmother was a curandera, a healer. Perhaps it runs in the blood." Such conversations reinforced Tessa's belief that she had found her place, her purpose. The only shadow on her contentment was Tyler's continued absence. Though she heard his name mentioned occasionally, "Vaughn's bringing cattle to market next week," or "Vaughn donated lumber for the school repairs," he had not returned to town as promised. Tessa told herself it shouldn't matter. They had shared an intense experience, certainly, but that didn't create any obligation between them. Tyler had his ranch, his own life. She had her school and her new beginning. Their paths had crossed by chance, not design. Yet she couldn't deny the disappointment that tugged at her heart each time she heard hoofbeats on the street and looked up to find it wasn't him. It was nearly 2 weeks after her arrival in Los Alamos when Tessa, walking home from school with her arms full of student compositions, heard a familiar voice call her name. "Miss Wilson." She turned to find Tyler dismounting from his buckskin, looking much as he had when they'd first met, capable, self-contained, but with a warmth in his eyes that belied his reserved manner. "Mr. Vaughn," she replied, her pulse quickening traitorously. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about Los Alamos," he approached, taking some of the papers from her arms without being asked. "Not forgotten, just busy. Storm damaged some fences, scattered part of the herd, took longer to set right than I expected." He hesitated, then added, "And I went back for your trunk." Tessa's eyes widened. "You did, but the canyon flood waters receded enough to get through safely," Tyler explained. "Found it right where we saw it. Contents are a bit worse for wear, but better than nothing." Emotion welled in Tessa's throat. That he had remembered, had made the effort to recover her few possessions when he had so much work of his own to attend to, spoke volumes about the kind of man he was. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing the words were inadequate. "That was incredibly thoughtful," Tyler shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Seemed the right thing to do." He nodded toward her cottage, visible down the street. "May I walk you home? I've brought the trunk. It's in my wagon at the mercantile." They walked side by side, Tyler asking about her first weeks of teaching, Tessa eager to share her experiences and impressions of the town. It felt natural, comfortable, as if the connection forged during their journey had simply been paused rather than broken. At the cottage, Tyler brought in her trunk while Tessa prepared coffee, falling into a domestic rhythm that felt both novel and strangely familiar. "The school seems to be going well," Tyler observed as they sat at her small table. "Heard nothing but good things from folks in town." "The children are wonderful," Tessa said, unable to keep the enthusiasm from her voice. "So eager to learn, so curious about everything. Even the older boys who I was warned might be difficult have been respectful and engaged." Tyler smiled slightly. "Might have something to do with the teacher. Stories of your courage during the flood have made the rounds. Hard to disrespect someone who survived what you did." Tessa felt her cheeks warm. "I had help, as I recall." "You would have found a way without me," Tyler said with unexpected conviction. "That's what impressed me from the start, your determination, your refusal to surrender even when the odds were against you." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within Tessa. "It's strange," she said after a moment. "In St. Louis, I was never seen that way. I was William's fiancée, or Margaret Wilson's niece, or simply another young woman whose primary value lay in her marriage prospects." "Their loss," Tyler said simply. He hesitated, then added, "I brought something else for you besides the trunk." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Found these growing near my creek. Thought they might be useful." Curious, Tessa unwrapped the package to find a bundle of dried wildflowers and herbs. "These are beautiful, but I'm afraid I don't know what they are." "Local plants," Tyler explained. "Thought you might use them for science lessons. That one's yarrow good for stopping bleeding, and that's sage, and this one's rabbit brush. Indians use it for dye, makes a yellow color." The thoughtfulness of the gift, not just flowers, but something practical for her teaching, moved Tessa deeply. "This is perfect. The children will love learning about local plants and their uses." Tyler nodded, pleased that she understood. "I could show you more if you're interested. Take you riding on Sunday after church, maybe. There's a meadow not far from town with a dozen different kinds this time of year." "I'd like that," Tessa said, perhaps too quickly. A moment of silence stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Tyler rose, setting his empty coffee cup on the table. "I should go. Got supplies to pick up before heading back to the ranch." Tessa walked him to the door, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. "Thank you again for the trunk and the plants, and for the invitation." Tyler paused in the doorway, his expression softening as he looked down at her. "I'm glad you made it to Los Alamos, Tessa Wilson. This town needed someone like you." Before she could respond, he'd touched the brim of his hat and was gone, leaving Tessa with the distinct impression that he'd been about to say something else entirely. Sunday arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures perfect for riding. Tessa wore her best dress to church, one of the few that had survived the flooding relatively unscathed, conscious of the curious glances from the townspeople. Though she'd been in Los Alamos for 2 weeks now, her association with Tyler Vaughn was still the subject of speculation and interest. Tyler was waiting outside the church after the service, the buckskin and a gentle-looking mare saddled and ready. He'd made an effort with his appearance. Tessa noted with pleasure his shirt was crisp, his hair neatly combed beneath his hat, his usual stubble shaved clean to reveal a strong jawline. "You look nice," he said as she approached, the compliment awkward but sincere. "So do you," Tessa replied, suddenly shy despite everything they'd been through together. They rode out of town side by side, following a well-worn trail that wound through stands of pine and across meadows bright with autumn wildflowers. Tessa relished the freedom of being on horseback again, this time without fear or urgency driving them forward. Tyler proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out plants and explaining their properties, occasionally sharing stories of the land they traversed, which creek never dried up even in drought years, which ridge had been the site of an old Apache camp, which meadow had the best grass for grazing. They stopped for lunch in a small clearing near a stream, spreading a blanket Tyler had brought in his saddlebags. The simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit tasted like a feast in the open air, with the sound of water flowing nearby and the scent of pine on the breeze. "I never thanked you properly," Tessa said as they finished eating, "for saving my life, for guiding me to Los Alamos, for everything." Tyler looked slightly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "No thanks needed between friends." "Is that what we are, friends?" Tessa asked, feeling suddenly bold. Tyler met her gaze, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "I'd like to think so, though." He hesitated, seeming to search for words. "Though I find myself wondering if we might become something more in time." The directness of his statement, free from artifice or manipulation, took Tessa's breath away. In St. Louis, courtship had been a game of manners and hidden meanings. This straightforward acknowledgement of feeling was as refreshing as it was unexpected. "I've wondered the same," she admitted, her heart pounding. "But I came here to be independent, to build a life on my own terms. I'm not sure I'm ready to consider anything else." Tyler nodded slowly, respect rather than disappointment in his expression. "I understand that. And I wouldn't want to interfere with the life you're building." He paused, then added, "But perhaps we could get to know each other better as friends and see where that leads." Relief and gratitude washed through Tessa. That he understood her need for independence, respected her ambitions rather than seeing them as obstacles to be overcome, confirmed what she'd begun to suspect during their journey, that Tyler Vaughn was unlike any man she'd known before. "I'd like that very much," she said softly. The months that followed established a pattern that became precious to Tessa. Tyler would come to town every Saturday for supplies, always making time to visit her at the cottage or walk with her through the streets of Los Alamos. On Sundays after church, weather permitting, they would ride together, exploring the countryside and growing more comfortable in each other's company. Winter brought snow to the highlands and cooler temperatures to the valley, transforming the landscape Tessa had come to love. The school thrived under her guidance, her students making progress that earned praise from parents and town council members alike. She started an evening class for adults who wished to improve their reading and writing, finding deep satisfaction in helping miners and ranch hands, and even several women from town gained skills they'd never had the opportunity to learn. Tyler became a familiar figure at these evening sessions, not as a student but as a volunteer assistant, helping those who struggled with reading while Tessa worked with others on writing or arithmetic. His patience and lack of condescension endeared him to the adult students, many of whom knew him only as the quiet rancher who kept to himself. "You're good at this," Tessa observed one evening as they walked home after class, their breath forming clouds in the cold December air. "Have you ever thought about teaching?" Tyler chuckled. "Can't say that I have, but I enjoy helping folks learn. Reminds me of when I taught my sister to read. She struggled with the letters getting jumbled up, needed extra patience." "Dyslexia," Tessa said. "It's not uncommon, though most teachers don't understand it or don't take the time to work with those who have it." "You would have been good for her," Tyler said thoughtfully. "Might have made her schooling less of a trial." These glimpses into his past, his family, were precious to Tessa. Though they spent more and more time together, Tyler remained in some ways reserved, sharing his thoughts freely but keeping parts of himself carefully guarded. Tessa respected this privacy, recognizing in it a counterpart to her own need for independence. As Christmas approached, the town of Los Alamos prepared for celebration. The schoolhouse was decorated with paper chains and pine boughs, and the children practiced songs and recitations for the holiday program. Tessa threw herself into the preparations, determined that her first Christmas in her new home would be memorable for her students. The evening of the program, the schoolhouse was packed with families eager to see their children perform. Tessa, watching from the side of the room as her students sang and recited with varying degrees of confidence, felt a surge of pride and belonging. This community had welcomed her, had given her purpose and place. Her gaze found Tyler standing at the back of the room, his tall figure easy to spot among the crowd. He caught her looking and smiled, a warm, private expression that sent heat rising to her cheeks despite the distance between them. After the program, as families gathered for refreshments and to congratulate the young performers, Mayor Haskell approached Tessa with a broad smile. "A triumph, Miss Wilson. I don't believe Los Alamos has ever seen such a fine Christmas program." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "The town council has authorized a raise in your salary for the next term. We're determined to keep you here, you know. Several of the neighboring communities have been making envious comments about our schoolteacher." "That's very generous, Mayor," Tessa replied, genuinely touched. "But you needn't worry, I have no intention of leaving Los Alamos." The mayor's smile widened. "Excellent news, though I must say some of us have been wondering if we might be losing you to a different calling altogether." He nodded discreetly toward Tyler, who was helping some of the younger children reach the refreshment table. "Vaughn's been a changed man these past months. Never seen him so involved in town affairs, nor so quick to smile." Tessa felt her face warm again. "Mr. Vaughn and I are good friends, nothing more." Of course," the mayor said, though his expression remained knowing. "Well, enjoy the festivities, Miss Wilson. You've earned it." As the crowd began to thin, Tyler made his way to Tessa's side, a cup of punch in each hand. "For the school, marm," he said, offering her one with a smile. "Quite a success tonight." "Thank you," Tessa replied, accepting the cup gratefully. "It means a lot that you came." "Wouldn't have missed it," Tyler said simply. He hesitated, then added, "I have something for you, a Christmas gift." "Not sure when would be the right time to give it." "Now seems perfect," Tessa said, curious and touched that he'd thought to get her a present. Tyler reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in plain paper and tied with string. "It's nothing fancy," he warned as he handed it to her. Tessa unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small leather-bound book. Opening it, she found blank pages of good quality paper, with pressed wildflowers carefully mounted between some of them. "It's a journal," Tyler explained, looking slightly self-conscious, "for recording your observations of the plants and such. The pressed ones are from different seasons, thought they might be useful for teaching when those types aren't growing." Emotion welled in Tessa's throat. The gift was so perfectly suited to her interests, so thoughtfully prepared. "Tyler, it's beautiful, thank you." "You're welcome," he said softly. Then, with uncharacteristic hesitation, "I was wondering if you might join me for Christmas dinner. At my ranch, it's not much, but I thought—" "I'd love to," Tessa interrupted, sparing him the awkwardness of further explanation. The relief and pleasure that spread across his face was worth any potential gossip the invitation might generate. In that moment, Tessa realized that the careful friendship they'd been building had already evolved into something deeper, something neither of them had named but both recognized. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, with a dusting of snow that transformed the landscape into a winter wonderland. Tyler arrived at Tessa's cottage promptly at noon, driving a sleigh rather than his usual wagon. "Borrowed it from the Millers," he explained as he helped her up onto the seat. "Thought you might enjoy the ride." The journey to Tyler's ranch took them through snow-covered hills and valleys, the sleigh runners gliding smoothly over the white landscape. Tessa, wrapped in blankets beside Tyler, felt a contentment that went beyond the beauty of the day or the anticipation of the meal to come. There was something right about being here with him, something that felt like coming home. The ranch itself was more impressive than Tessa had expected: a substantial log house with a wide porch, well-built barns and corrals, all nestled in a protected valley with a creek running through it and pine-covered hills rising behind. Everything spoke of care and attention to detail, of a man who took pride in his work and his land. "It's beautiful," Tessa said as Tyler helped her from the sleigh. "You've built something wonderful here." "It's a work in progress," Tyler replied, though she could see her approval pleased him. "But it's home." Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, with a fire blazing in the stone hearth and the scent of roasting meat filling the air. The main room was simply but comfortably furnished, with bookshelves lining one wall and large windows offering views of the valley. "You've gone to a lot of trouble," Tessa observed, noting the table set with what was clearly Tyler's best china and a vase of winter greenery as a centerpiece. "Wanted to do it right," Tyler admitted, taking her coat and hanging it carefully. "Not often I have guests worth impressing." The meal was surprisingly good: a roast, vegetables from Tyler's root cellar, fresh bread he admitted he'd gotten from Mrs. Mitchell in town, and an apple pie for dessert. "Did you cook all this yourself?" Tessa asked, impressed. Tyler smiled slightly. "I've lived alone a long time. Had to learn to feed myself properly or starve." After they'd eaten, they moved to the chairs by the fire, the early winter darkness already falling outside. Tessa felt a contentment she hadn't expected, a sense of rightness that transcended the occasion. "I have something for you," she said, reaching for her bag. "A Christmas gift." She handed Tyler a package similar in size to the one he'd given her. He unwrapped it carefully to reveal a book, a new edition of Thoreau's Walden she'd ordered specially from Santa Fe. "I noticed you had an older copy on your shelf at the cabin," she explained. "This one has illustrations, I thought. Well, the way he writes about nature reminded me of how you speak about this land." Tyler ran his fingers over the embossed cover, visibly moved. "This is perfect, thank you." He looked up at her then, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "You know, when I found you in that river last spring, I never imagined we'd be sitting here at Christmas." "Nor did I," Tessa admitted. "So much has changed since then." "You've changed this place," Tyler said quietly. "Changed me. I've lived here 10 years, but it never felt quite complete until—" He hesitated, searching for words, "until I reached out my hand and you took it." The simple truth of his statement struck Tessa deeply. Yes, he had saved her from the river, from the flood, but in doing so, he had also offered her something beyond physical rescue: partnership, understanding, the recognition of a kindred spirit. "I came west seeking independence," she said softly. "I thought that meant being entirely self-sufficient, needing no one. But I've learned that true independence isn't about standing alone, it's about choosing who to stand with." Tyler leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "And who do you choose to stand with, Tessa Wilson?" Her heart pounding, Tessa reached out to take his hand. "You, Tyler Vaughn, if you'll have me." The kiss that followed was gentle at first, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something more profound: a promise, a commitment, a coming home. When they finally drew apart, Tyler kept hold of her hands. "I love you," he said simply. "Have since the canyon, I think, maybe since the river. Just took me time to recognize it." "I love you too," Tessa replied, the words feeling right, natural, as if she'd been waiting all her life to say them to this man. "And I'm not afraid of it anymore." They married in the spring, when the wildflowers carpeted the meadows and the river ran clear and strong through the valley. The entire town of Los Alamos turned out for the ceremony, Mayor Haskell beaming as he pronounced them husband and wife in the newly painted church. Tessa continued teaching, riding to town each morning and back to the ranch each afternoon, finding in the rhythm of their shared life a joy she had never expected when she first set out from St. Louis. Tyler expanded the ranch, adding to their herd and improving the land, always with an eye toward the future they would build together. In the years that followed, that future included children, first a son with Tyler's quiet strength and Tessa's questioning mind. Then twin daughters who kept them both constantly on their toes with their curiosity and determination. The house grew to accommodate their expanding family, but it was always filled with books, with learning, with the values both Tyler and Tessa held dear. Each spring, when the snow melted and the rivers rose with the runoff from the mountains, Tyler would take Tessa to a particular spot overlooking the canyon where they'd nearly lost their lives to the flood. There, with the water rushing below them, safe on solid ground, he would take her hand and repeat the words that had changed everything. "Hold on. You're not alone." And Tessa, looking at the life they had built together, the family they had created, would squeeze his hand and answer, "I never will be again."